water, earth, fire, air.
Long ago, an animated series for the ages premiered on Nickelodeon. But back then, no one could have predicted the impact it would leave. It was a true masterpiece of story, art, and resonant themes and ideas, but when the network needed it most, this piece of crap happened. About 10 years passed and a new generation of viewers rediscovered it on Netflix, and so the cycle began anew. And although its reception is once again great, who knows how long it'll be until Nick's next corporate blunder. Whatever happens, I believe this show will stay wonderful forever. Our story begins with two Family Guy alumni, Michael Dante DiMartino and Brian Konietzko. In 2001, these Rhode Island Design School graduates started collaborating on ideas for their own epic. The Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter movies were about to come out, and got people excited for grand high fantasy worlds, and the bright duo knew this. Pretty visuals were one thing, but they wanted theirs to mean something, being big followers of Eastern philosophies. All it took was a sketch Brian did of a boy herding bison in the sky for them to know what they wanted. Give him a home in the snow and make him the enemy of fire people, it's just the natural order of things. It would take a pretty long time for their vision to fully come to life. Eric Coleman of Nickelodeon liked their ideas a lot and eventually gave it a home on their network. There's just one 11-letter problem with this that I'll eventually get to, but the pre-production phase went smoothly. The world was fleshed out enough that a pilot episode was produced in 2003. It looks like the show we eventually got, but still needed to be more refined. The story of a boy with an arrow on his head who can control air and fights off fire guys needs nuance and time in the oven here. Avatar: The Last Airbender, or Avatar: The Legend of Aang, as it was referred to in some countries, was announced at Comic-Con 2004 and premiered on Nickelodeon on February 21st, 2005. The Comic-Con announcement was worth it, as the show became an immediate success. During its run, critics went gaga for its mature storytelling, beautiful animation, and believable characters. And even though it ended 3 years later on July 19th, 2008, that praise hasn't stopped coming. To this day, it's frequently touted as Nickelodeon's magnum opus, and a shining standard for story-driven animated media. That is, despite the ridiculously awful 2010 movie directed by M. Night Shyamalan, where bored white children talk about fighting an Indian army for 100 minutes and all have speech impediments.
Are you the Avatar Aang?
A sequel series in 2012 that was constantly messed with by Nick and has garnered a very divisive reaction from the original show's fanbase, and an upcoming live-action remake that Bright were involved with at first, but now aren't, so it's hard to have faith in it. For such an acclaimed show, Nick's treatment of it since it ended has been upsetting. At least they put it on Netflix in 2020, which is how I and many others were able to experience it for the first time. Re-experience for me. I vividly remembered watching a few episodes when I was a kid, but was more interested in Disney Channel than Nickelodeon by that point. And so, because my nostalgia connection to Avatar isn't that strong, time for the million-dollar question. Did it do some harm to Nickelodeon as a network? It was made at a pivotal point in their history, as there was less and less variety in each show, and SpongeBob soaked up an unhealthy amount of the schedule. Maybe Avatar, being so mature and catered to teens and adults, gave them the impression that it wasn't reflective of their kids' rule mentality, and they should focus much more on the demographic that had been making them money for the past quarter century. I'm just playing devil's advocate here. Remember the golden rule. Every show that's ever aired on Nickelodeon has killed Nickelodeon. The Avatar franchise is the only one of its kind, but maybe that negatively affected their choice of programming going forward. Of course, this doesn't affect the quality of the show in any way, but I guess there really can be only one Avatar, huh?
Katara and I discovered Aang frozen in an iceberg. Now, I didn't like Aang at first, but I grew to love him over time. Then we went to the Southern Air Temple where Aang used to live, and then we met Suki, who's a Kyoshi warrior.
This series takes place in a world where 4 nations coexist: a water tribe, fire nation, earth kingdom, and air nomadhood, each having benders that can control their respective element. All except for one being known as the Avatar, who can master all 4 elements. The Avatar isn't one singular person, rather it's constantly reincarnated. Think the Dalai Lama, but with elemental powers. But then, as you all know, everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. Seeking power and control over the whole world, the nation began invading others and putting them through hell. Surely the Avatar can put a stop to this. Where'd he go? 100 years later, an incarnation of the Avatar never known about before, a 12-year-old air nomad called Aang, is discovered in an iceberg by two teenagers from the water tribe, Katara and Sokka. However, they eventually get noticed when they venture into an old ship and send off a flare signal which catches the burnt eye of Zuko, the disowned prince of the Fire Nation, who believes capturing the Avatar will restore his honor. How does he know Aang's the Avatar? Well, the Avatar hasn't been seen in 100 years, and the air nomads were invaded and wiped out not long after, so... Thus begins a wild goose chase across the world, Zuko and his uncle Iroh having a boat, and Aang, Katara, and Sokka fly around on Appa the Sky Bison, trying to find places and people to train Aang in other bending systems and avatar powers that only apply to him, so he can restore balance to the world. As previously noted, the lore of Avatar and Aang's journey are heavily influenced by Chinese and other Eastern mythologies, philosophies, and art, so much that some people are happy to categorize it as an anime. I wouldn't go that far. By that logic, Kung Fu Panda counts as anime. However, to me, that's just a testament to how authentic of an Eastern experience they made. Having a cultural consultant and an extensive knowledge of martial arts for the fight scenes also doesn't hurt. I shall get to those fight scenes eventually, and touch on more of the story and writing as I go on, but now's the time where I usually jump into characters, and this show had a lot of excellent ones. Aang is a 112-year-old air nomad who fled the responsibility of being the current Avatar, and that's had some consequences. But he hasn't grown up since freezing himself and his bison Appa in an iceberg, so visiting these places and going through these experiences are his means of becoming a braver, wiser hero. But he never, under any circumstances, loses his free spirit and compassion for others, or loses sight of getting the war over with peacefully. He's a main character you can trust and want to learn about and see him succeed, but remember that he's still just a kid and can be naive in his optimism, especially early on. Aang starts out with 3 travelling companions, including a sky bison Appa, who's also the last of his kind, and that's hard to believe because he's really dang cute. Big, fluffy, lovable, strong enough to fly all these long distances. Dang it, why isn't he the Avatar? Katara is a young waterbender from the southern water tribe who can have a short fuse, but is kind of a new mentor for Aang. You know, before the whole romance kicks in. As a waterbender, she also functions as Aang's first valid bending teacher, and is travelling the world partially to find her father again. So whether or not you can get behind her snappier moments and tendencies, she's still part of Team Aang for a good cause, and is an immense help. Her brother Sokka also begrudgingly joins them. At first he's a stern, condescending voice of reason, but he quickly becomes more silly and relaxed. Watching the series over, it's very weird watching those first few episodes again, where he can sometimes be a little callous, but it's good to see that even in the Avatar world, travel broadens the mind. Team Avatar eventually gets a 5th member in the form of Momo, a flying lemur from the Southern Air Temple who makes a fine pet character. He and Appa get into a little mischief, and he has more of a general use than that, showing that a small part of the air nomad society is still knocking about. In Book 2, we're introduced to Toph, a tough earthbender from the Earth Kingdom who's blind, but can still earthbend by feeling vibrations in the ground. She runs away from her rich, overbearing family to train Aang too, but being 12 isn't the best teacher in the world. She can leave a rough first impression, but like Sokka, has some great moments as she becomes more familiar. Throughout their travels, they're all followed by Zuko, the disgraced prince of the Fire Nation who will do anything to regain the trust of his abusive but powerful father. He really has got something crawling in his skin, but he's got a very justified and personal villainous motivation. His journeys move in a more serialized manner earlier on, which helps build trust that he'll change and grow in different ways. His uncle Iroh, aka my favorite character, is Zuko's mentor, always pushing him to do the right thing and live a more fulfilling life. Wise, experienced, and surprisingly strong, his role is elevated by the incredible performance of the late Mako, who sadly passed away halfway through the show's run, which has made our connection and time with the character even stronger somewhat. They got another actor, Greg Baldwin, to voice him for the final book, and thankfully it isn't too far off. Fire Lord Ozai is the cold, ruthless ruler of the Fire Nation, and a direct cause for Zuko's angst and confusion over his faith. He's just the latest in a long line of Fire Lords like that. He's just keeping the spirit alive, you know? I think you'll learn enough about him and why he chooses to be evil and powerful. Same with Azula, Zuko's sociopathic sister who's more vicious, threatening, and therefore more favoured by the family. She was a wonderfully chilling addition to Book 2, showing there's always a much bigger fish, and making Zuko look okay in comparison. Azula travels with two other girls, Mei, who's stern, stoic, and in love with Zuko, and Ty Lee, who's young and agile but not particularly self-aware. These two couldn't be any more different, so whether or not you love one and are indifferent to the other, they're still a dynamic duo. I'll just fire off a few more. This cast is a little too big and too good for this sort of review format. The Kyoshi warriors aren't like other girls, they're strong, talented fighters prepared for anything. They're good for softening Sokka out, but aren't super prominent. King Bumi is the very eccentric prince of an Earth Kingdom and a 100-year-old childhood friend of Aang's. Really, some things never change. I warmed up to him once they revealed who he was. They were really good at hiding it, and really good at keeping him entertaining after. Jet and his gang of thugs are first presented as Robin Hood figures, outlaws looking to take the Fire Nation down a peg, but are then revealed to just be anarchists out for the thrill of destruction. They're more fleshed out after this point, and Jet becomes a very important part of Book 2's storyline, still serving as a reminder that just ideologies can lead to radical and dangerous actions and people.
I'll let you peruse my vast collection, on one condition. To prove your worth as scholars, you have to contribute some worthwhile knowledge.
With a story this open-ended, there's 1,000 different angles to hone in on, and many different tones you can go for. And this series makes sure it never pleases no one. There's a 50-50 split between dark, serious, and mature matters and themes, and silly, wide-eyed fun. But around the halfway mark, it becomes more of a 60-40, as the stakes rise and the characters take their missions more seriously. This is the right approach. You get an engaging land to explore either way you slice it, and since they do both light and dark content so well, it was able to win me over pretty easily. I love Samurai Jack, but back when I reviewed it, I felt like when they got silly, they got carried away and couldn't appeal to my awakening inner action fan. But with Avatar, I was expecting a serious adventure with 1 or 2 funny moments per episode, and was pleasantly surprised when I kept getting great stories and great jokes, week in, week out. There are certain things in this world that nobody takes seriously, like that poor sap who keeps getting his cabbages ruined, but there are constant themes that carry over from book to book, chapter to chapter, that define the show and its messages. First off, war and peace. Why do nations want to go to war, and why do individuals want world peace? By following 2 perspectives, that of a resistance and that of royal blood of the most powerful nation ever, we get the answers to both at a similar and natural pace, and their reasons for their sides of the spectrum. Another common theme throughout The Last Airbender is freedom. Time and time again, Team Avatar will face a group of people who are stuck or helpless in a situation, be it earthbenders stuck on a Fire Nation ship as prisoners, a city under constant surveillance by a totalitarian government, or a small town past its prime and losing its magic touch and sense of humor. This leads into larger demonstrations and discussions of choice and personal responsibilities that, although made in a fantasy world, are always dealt with in a realistic nature, and in a way that anyone from 7 to 70 can learn from and understand. And I think the most vital theming component to Avatar's success was a serious approach to the id. What do these characters know to do on instinct, and how will it hurt or help them in their goals? It can lead to just an easy way to get out of trouble, or the most shocking moment in any season finale I've ever seen. That'll lead nicely into my spiel on Avatar lore and what I like about it. But to wrap up the id stuff, it really goes to show how much thought they put into each character when you can pretty much see them thinking, feel it. So with a big old world like this, you're gonna have to expect a past and reason for things, namely why most of the Fire Nation's so evil, what the deal with the Avatar is, and how bending works. I really love the reincarnation aspect of the Avatar, that there's been countless avatars before Aang, and there'll be countless after him. Aang's special powers beyond bending everything are shown and explained in a natural order, as well as his one weakness. If he's killed in his all-powerful Avatar state, the Avatar's dead for good. I don't really know where to start with the animation. Perhaps with the obvious, unlike most Western cartoons, the frames are done on twos, ostensibly meaning there's movement every 2 frames. This is done to allow for easier control of movement, which they really needed for the fight scenes, and just to make actions and reactions and designs believable. One thing I was a little afraid of was that they'd have a muted, stagnant color palette, but I was pleasantly congratulated by a very robust and smart use of color theory. Of course, scenes in Fire Nation territory will be very heavy on red and orange, and blues and whites would indicate either the Water Tribe or a need for serenity. It's used really organically, the palettes just sort of melt into any location or feeling they can. And I don't think I need to go too in depth with the fight scenes. They're awesome, based on real Eastern fighting systems, but now with the leeway of letting the special effects go to town. And maybe I'm simply not a stickler for animation quality per episode, but it never felt like they went up or down too sporadically. One episode may be light on fights here and there, but it's not like they're obvious made-on-a-dime bottle episodes. Each chapter pushes the story forward as best it can, from the start to the end.
Nice try, pupil Sangok. A couple of more years and you might be ready to fight a sea sponge.
Avatar hit the ground running. This does everything you'd want a first season to do. Introduce all the characters and themes organically, while still telling a big story that's satisfying in its own right, in case they don't get picked up for a second season. But that would be un-Nickelodeon-like. All their shows have at least 2 seasons. Something I'm sure Book 1 has already received a lot of credit for is introducing you to the world at the same pace that Aang is being reintroduced to it. All the bad and the remaining good. With that said, this is all normal to Katara and Sokka, so you're still able to understand that this is a world that's been explored before and crafted into its current image by multiple cultures. While they've got multiple goals, namely saving the world, Team Avatar takes baby steps. First looking around the south and northern air temples for clues as to how Aang can hone his airbending skills, then the northern water tribe to find a waterbending master to teach Aang and Katara. I like how they travel from the south to the north. It's a literal uphill battle. Through all of this, Aang develops more common sense, discovers more about his past lives, and learns the hard way how dangerous the elements can be. While Sokka lets his guard down more and later falls in love with the water princess Yue. But I kid you not, she turns herself into the moon. She calls herself Moon Yue. Funniest shit I've ever seen. As for how they kick off Zuko's arc, it's really great too. He is, by all means, the main villain of this book. Uncle Iroh tries to guide him to the light side, but is constantly shot down, and although we learn why Zuko is the way he is, his actions are still presented as the most villainous. That said, they've built him up as a tragic hero. I'm happy that while watching, I didn't know when he was going to switch sides, if at all. If I do have a few scattered nitpicks with Book 1 that don't have to do with episodes set in canyons, it's that sometimes a joke can fall out of the sky and flat on its face. I appreciate them keeping it entertaining, and I like most of the jokes on this show, but when it's done to just make a good scene less serious, it's very Book 1. Let's say, hypothetically, if Books 1 and 3 score a 95, then Book 2 is a 120. I hate numerically grading my shows, but you get what I mean. Book 2 is masterful. It wouldn't be a Nicktoon if it didn't peak around the 35 episode mark, let's be real. This season is the best at a lot of things, but the key aspect to me is the feeling of a journey. After Azula is put in charge of fighting the Avatar, Zuko and Iroh are wanted men and go on the run. Their destination? Ba Sing Se, a shining Earth Kingdom city that everyone wants to enter. Their goal? For Iroh it's just settling down and living a normal life. For Zuko it's distancing himself from the Fire Nation and figuring out who he wants to be. Don't worry, he figures out. Jokes aside, it's great experiencing them bond more and end up accomplishing Iroh's goal. But Team Avatar's travels get more serialized too. Once Toph joins the team, there's a brief arc about them getting used to a new teammate, which is followed by a larger arc of learning about the Day of the Black Sun, in a library guarded by a giant owl, then finally getting to Ba Sing Se to tell the king of the day. But they've got a problem. Ba Sing Se is heavily monitored, and clearly covering up some shady stuff. It's a bit cliche to compare this all to 1984, but both are written to demonize totalitarian governments and the suppression of free speech. Making the Earth King unaware of all these problems and shocked when he sees them is a rather brilliant way of showing how ignorant politicians can be just as, if not more dangerous, than malicious ones. He wasn't even personally in charge of all this. That's kind of chilling. There's a lot of stuff they do here that's honestly pretty spooky, but it all has a dang good point, and I really can't complain. What's even better is that, even after all this Ba Sing Se trouble is resolved, the tension still rises. They've still got a battle to get through, and it all comes down to Zuko's choices. Screw it, since you made it this far, I'll just say what happens. He befriends Katara, but when push comes to shove, he letting Azula win and get the Fire Nation to take over the Earth Kingdom. Through all this development, he still chose the dark side. What can happen next? I hope you can wait 9 months. Six months in universe pass before Aang reawakens to a lot of bad news. The Fire Nation has invaded almost the entire world, and Team Avatar has become a more tightly knit resistance with less room to move. Raising the stakes by restricting the protagonist's movement and good impact on the world was the right call, especially since the Day of the Black Sun is gonna soon be followed by the arrival of Sozin's Comet, which will give firebenders an insane amount of power. The clock is ticking and there's no more time to goof off, only search out information, resources, and allies. Notably, questions about the characters' families are being explored with greater depth. Katara and Sokka reunite with their father, Hakoda, but their mother Kaya's abduction and certain death haunt Katara even more, to the point where she performs bloodbending on the supposed killer. What's bloodbending? Long story, great episode, and what's Zuko doing there? After getting his honor back, he was left unfulfilled with being a prince again, and upon learning about his great-grandfather Sozin's bitter falling out with Avatar Roku, and that they're both great-grandfathers of his, he comes to resent what the Fire Nation stands for and offers to join Team Avatar. But, you know, they're pretty skeptical after all the stuff he's put them through over the months. It's that kind of plotline where he really has to prove himself. We know he's changed, they don't, but upon rewatch and reflection, I realized I kind of needed this plotline, and I welcomed him with open arms knowing everything he's been through. The rest of the story is getting really big with a bunch of moving parts, like Iroh breaking out of prison and catching up with his secret old people resistance. Then there's the play they all go to, which is pretty much anti-Avatar propaganda. Ozai crowns himself the Phoenix King, making Azula the new Fire Lady, though she quickly loses her mind and descends into paranoia. This is not a happy family. Aang goes missing while pondering if he should kill Ozai if the ends justify the means, but crisis averted because he's told of a new power by a talking island. Very big, very dramatic fight scene, and that's about as much as I can take in. Were the lion turtle thing and Azula going insane a little too easy? Probably. But they'd written themselves into such a huge, unbelievably epic battle, and this ending's great, but it doesn't feel as well planned out as the rest of the show. It's the send-off the show needed rather than deserved, with only one loose end deliberately left to your imagination, or a graphic novel series. With all of that, here are my 10 favourite Avatar The Last Airbender episodes. I had to limit myself to 10 or I'd be here all day. Tales of Ba Sing Se confused me at first, coming after such a dark, intense introduction to the city. I wasn't expecting a lighthearted anthology chronicling a day in the lives of our characters. It was a pleasant surprise all the same, with Iroh's segment in particular making me sad every time I watch it. The Avatar and the Fire Lord, much like an earlier episode I've put higher, looks into the backstories of Aang and Zuko's lineages and how similar they are, to say the least. I loved learning more about Roku and Sozin's friendship and eventual falling out. It really puts into perspective the whole latitude of the Fire Nation since then, and exactly how everything changed. The Southern Raiders is a big turning point for Zuko's relationship with the gang, as now everyone trusts him. We also learn a lot more about Katara's mother and how her disappearance has affected her and her image of the Fire Nation. Very negatively. I'd understand if the lengths she goes to are a bridge too far for some people, but it couldn't have illustrated her anger any better. Imprisoned was a very smart message of how the Fire Nation has impacted the Earthbenders, by taking them as far away from ground as possible and stripping them of their hope. It's like it was meant to be. And Katara helping them out was a very smart indicator of how they'll affect those they meet over time. It really sets the stage for how their journey will go for the next 20-odd episodes. The Crossroads of Destiny is all a big test of faith for Zuko, and is the most impactful episode of the whole series by a long shot. The drama reaches a fever pitch, and it's the start and end to so many new dynamics, and thankfully this has enough time to juggle all of it and make it compelling. The Puppet Master relishes in being a dark, pretty morbid tale, where Katara learns a violent waterbending technique called bloodbending from a rather suspicious old lady, perfectly portrayed by Tress MacNeille. I don't think I'm ever gonna see Agnes Skinner the same way ever again, but I got Avatar's creepiest episode out of the experience, and I'm glad they showed what they could do when they go there. The Storm gives us a lowdown on why Aang disappeared for 100 years, and why Zuko's chasing after him, showing just how different the Air Nomads and Fire Nation are at treating children. At least Monk Gyatso was kind and supportive, whereas Lord Ozai just raised a pawn in his conquest for power. It's one of the first times you can feel sorry for Zuko, making it very important in the grand scheme of the series. Nightmares and Daydreams was a very wise Book 3 episode, reminding you that although the world is ending, its fate mostly rests in a 12, maybe 13-year-old. It touches on his anxieties about an impending battle and how strong he should be for it, while still having fun with it and bordering on a breather episode. The Swamp is not only a very pretty episode, bringing the green out in full force, but also very mysterious and moving. The gang lands in a sentient swamp brimming with hallucinations and madmen, leaving them to the whims of a living location and their own darkest thoughts and memories. It's unlike any other story, but fits the adventure like a glove, offering a flavour of Avatar all its own, a very intriguing one. And my favourite episode of all is Appa's Lost Days. During a scuffle in the library, Appa's taken by bandits, leaving Team Avatar to travel on foot for a while. Here, we learn what happened to Appa, and how he was treated as a rare animal, the awful people he was taken by, and the good people who did their best to set him free. It's a really grim parade of animal cruelty, showing the seedy underbelly of the Avatar world in all its glory. But also an amazing sign that Aang's travels was starting to do some good for the world. I'm no animal rights activist, but this episode makes me disgusted and then relieved that we as humans are like this. Because of the show's excellent track record with good or at least meaningful episodes, I've only got 3 misses that I think were the worst the show put out. 1 weak link for each book, starting with The Chase. While Toph was a welcome addition to the group, it took a while for the arguments to settle, with this having the worst of it. Toph comes off as bratty, Katara comes off as a jerk, and Iroh getting injured comes off as the only way they could have made it remotely impactful. Pass. Episodes like these are what recaps are for. My least favorite episode from Book 1 is a predictable choice, The Great Divide. There's two groups of people that fight all the time, one snooty, the other savage, and the gang get caught up in it while stuck in a boring canyon. It's not fun, doesn't go anywhere, and the giant cockroaches are the highlight. Not to mention, the moral of the story is lie about historical figures. That won't worsen these groups' relationships later down the line. Even the Ember Island players didn't want to touch this one. It's weak, but not my least favorite. That would be the Painted Lady. Here, the gang goes to this old rundown pier that's lost its way, and Katara won't have that, so she tricks the gang into staying and pretends to be the pier's famous Painted Lady legend to help them. I am totally with Sokka on this one. It was not a good idea at all to stay in one location. And I was convinced that Aang would save the world and this pier eventually in the long run. It also didn't matter anyway because apparently the Painted Lady still exists in some form, judging by how she could talk to Katara in the end. Well then why didn't she help the village? Sorry for getting a little negative towards the end, it's just the way I structure my reviews. I will say though, Avatar: The Last Airbender kept a pretty high batting average from start to finish. Not every episode's a masterpiece, but none of them are awfully executed. Confusing sometimes, but you have to expect that from fantasy from time to time. Anyway, I loved my time watching through this show for the first time, and I tell you, it wasn't my last. I'm amazed at what Bright and their team of artists, animators, and writers and other crew were able to build from the ground up. This was an inspired and inspiring story about a world in chaos slowly being rebuilt by a new generation. That's going to stick with anyone. The characters are wonderful, the animation is fantastic, the passage of the story is sublime. It's all around excellent work. I had always wondered if people overrated this show, but it deserves all the praise it's gotten over 16 years. If you're bothered or tired of it constantly being put on a pedestal compared to other Nicktoons or other animated shows in general, I understand. Any commendation of it being the greatest thing of all time is totally subjective, but that doesn't mean it hasn't resonated with a lot of people and earned at least some of its unshakable status. I was kind of worried that the show had been overhyped before going into it, but that anxiety was put to rest by the 3-chapter mark. Is it my favorite animated show ever? Not quite at the top, but it's in the ballpark. I'm grateful to have gotten to this point where I can review this show, and I want to thank every single one of you who has subscribed to me over the years. All the liking, sharing, and support is awesome, and it really does mean a lot for me getting my thoughts out and sharing my deep, tough love for animation. Rest assured, I've still got a lot more reviews planned for the future. I'm not leaving just yet. What'll my next milestone be? Well, I know what I'm gonna do that day. Goodbye for now. And again, thanks for everything.
Up next, it's the Fairly Odd Parents on Nick.